Good evening, everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 3rd, and this is a regular Moscow City Council meeting. Gina?
Good evening. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gina. And the first order of business will be the consent agenda.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Okay, I got a motion by Art and a second by Jim to approve the consent agenda as it is stated. I'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, item number 2, staff recognition. Gary, do we have anything this evening, sir?
We do, and I believe Mike Parker from the Water Department will be handling that.
Okay, Mike Parker, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I had a whole long speech here, but Tyler said nervous bladder and the time that the council has is limited, so to shorten it down. Thank you, Tyler.
Well, that takes the pressure right off.
It does. Right there, we're all laughing. It's good because old country boy just does not do good in public speaking, so bear with me.
Grammar either.
Now, hey, settle down here.
Perhaps there is no field of service to man which is more fundamentally necessary and requires more thorough and complete 24-hour a day, year to year, year in and year out attention to duty than supplying safe and clean water to every household. Wholesome, potable, palatable water for drinking, culinary, bathing, and sanitary purposes, and at the same time maintaining adequate volume and pressure for horticulture, industry, and fire suppression. Then water. The City of Moscow currently has a young team of professionals within the water department, and two have two operators perform their work with excellence and passed the state operator exam. Exam 2, should be seen as a high honor. I would like to thank the council again for supporting our training and mayor, our training program, and publicly congratulate Meredith and Dan on successfully passing the state operator exam and performing at a high level of service, ultimately achieving the advancement to journeyman operator. Congratulations, both of you. Mary, you want to take photos with me?
Yeah, don't be bashful. Come on up. I always give you a chance to say when you don't. If you want, of course, I'll say something.
Run.
You're very welcome. One of the things, our employees, and this is just a wonderful example of two of our water department people that have gone above and beyond. They're moving their careers forward and doing the studies and doing the different things that they need to do in order to make the water supply in this town safe for all of us. As the mayor of this town, that's a big deal for me, and I'm sure it's a big deal for this entire council. And as evidence, I offered both individuals a chance to get up and say something. They left it up to me, and I'll tell you what, that's kind of a cool thing because these folks just get the work done. They're workers, they make it happen, and really in a lot of ways, they're very timid about getting a chance to be getting some recognition, and that's what this is all about, is about recognition. As the mayor of this town, that's a big deal for me. So hats off, congratulations, and let's give them both a round of applause. And we have many other employees in this town that work in this town that are just like that for our city, so thank you very much. Gary, do we have others?
No, sir, that should do it for tonight.
Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 3, which is mayor's appointments, and I have none this evening. So that will lead us into item number 4, which is public comment and mayor's response period. We allow 15 minutes for folks to get up and tell us what's on their mind, as long as it's something that is not on this evening's agenda and something that is not in front of the Board of Adjustment or Planning and Zoning. We'll give you 3 minutes, state your name, and tell us what's on your mind this evening. Okay. Nobody rushing to the podium. I will go on to item number 5, which is Citizens Commission Report. We have a Farmers Market Commission report, including an economic impact. We got Amanda here, and I'll let Amanda introduce others. Evening, Amanda.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and city staff. So I have the pleasure of introducing the chair of the Moscow Farmers Market Commission this evening, as well as a guest speaker. And the Farmers Market Commission works in tandem with the Moscow Farmers Market staff and Community Events Division to help guide the vision of the farmers market and make sure we're staying true to our values and our philosophies and the mission. And I've been working with Jamie since July of last year. She became chair this past winter, and it's been a real pleasure to work with her. So she put together a presentation this evening. We'll be hearing from her on updates on what the commission's been working on and some forthcoming projects. And then a small portion of tonight's meeting or tonight's presentation will have Steve Peterson with the University of Idaho talk about some updates to the economic assessment report. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jamie and Steve over here. I always forget which one I'm supposed to press. I'm gonna, got it right. Solid.
Thank you. All right. So I am not a fan of really boring PowerPoints. So I drove the whole staff crazy by making them deal with something a little bit different today. But my name is Jamie Hill. Like Amanda said, I'm the chair of the Moscow Farmers Market Commission, and I just wanted to share some of the stuff that our commission is working on, stuff that I'm really excited about. And I'm definitely a visual person. I'm all about the community and the relationships that we're building. I can't remember numbers to save my life. Not really sure how old I am. So brought a friend along to do the numbers with me. So who are we? We are a citizen commission that is made up of 9 individuals. We kind of have groups. So we have our vendors. We have Linda Heath, who is our craft vendor. Kelly Kingsland is our produce vendor. She's new to the commission this year. And Renee Love is our specialty food vendor. She is also serving as our vice chair. Then we have 4 community at-large members, so people from the area who are passionate about the market, whether that means they're passionate about food, the items that are sold at the market, or just Moscow in general. And I hope that you will note that in addition to myself, Carrie Morsek, and Joanne Munita, we have a vacancy. So if anybody knows anyone who would like to serve on the Farmers Market Commission, we would love to have a new friend. And then lastly, we have 2 specialized positions on our commission. One is reserved for a University of Idaho Extension person. In this case, it's Colette DePhelps. And then one is reserved for a representative from the Moscow Chamber of Commerce, and that is Jenny Ford. So our mission as the Moscow Farmers Market Commission and the Moscow Farmers Market, we celebrate life on the Palouse by providing the community with the opportunity to buy and sell locally farmed and or created agricultural products. That means crops, meats, cheese, wine, distinctive handmade goods, artisan pieces, and original recipe cuisine. This venue is meant to encourage and support sustainable economic, social, and environmental practices. That's a big, giant paragraph, and I know every commission has kind of a hefty mission, but really I think what it boils down to for us is that we are going to do our best to provide a thriving market to the community, one that allows new things to be seen and brought to the area, but also really focuses on local. Today at our commission meeting, that was the word of choice. Local currently means within 200 air miles. And that is something that really allows us to find things that necessarily don't exist in Moscow, but also allows us to really stay at home and kind of cultivate what is here. And I will touch on one of those special instances in a little bit. So, Moscow Farmers Commission, what are we doing right now? So much stuff. We are constantly updating and revamping the policies, the fee schedule. That's another conversation that's always really interesting. We could not exist if it was not for the help of the council and the city. When it comes to budgeting, we rely on the city to really support a good chunk financially of the market. However, we do bring in our own pretty hefty share of vendor fees. And again, all of that funding that we ask for, all of the funding that we use goes back to benefiting the community. So it is a continually revamping project, figuring out what works for our vendors, what works for our community, and what works for our city. We are constantly doing rapid market assessments. And like I said, we'll talk about numbers in a little bit. But mostly we're looking at who's coming to the market, why are they coming to the market, and what is that bringing to our economy. We do Main Street business outreach. We recognize that having a very, very large market on Main Street in downtown Moscow can be a plus as well as a burden. So we're working with businesses to reach out and say, how do you feel about the market? What can we do to help you? Can we provide you with more information? As a commission, it is our job to keep those lines of communication open and not have to bog down city staff with some of that, being able to kind of cipher through it and really feel out how can we help first. I'm pretty excited to start working with city staff this fall on some branding opportunities, really creating a look for the market. Every other market that I've ever been to in the region has some kind of image associated with it, so you really see it and go, yes, that's the farmer's market, I love that thing. So we're going to try and kind of help create our own identity this fall. And then the two that I'm going to really focus on, Market Side Chats, is a new program for us. We are working with StoryCorps. A big shout out to Colette DePhelps, who has really been the big kind of behind the scenes person putting all the details together. What we're intending to do is to collect oral histories about the farmers market from residents, from visitors, and from patrons of the market. All of this is leading up to our 50th anniversary in a few years, and we really want to be able to say, here's where the market started, here's where it's been, here's where it's going. And what I love is these chats have turned from kind of an information gathering session into really just hanging out with old friends and finding out all kinds of weird stories that you never knew. People being proposed to at the market. I have had probably 4 different people tell me I live in Moscow because of the market. So getting things like that recorded is really exciting for us. So we are doing market side chats once a month. They're taking place during the market at the Moscow Chamber of Commerce, and we would love to have all of you come down and tell your story as well. The next thing is that in order to have a vibrant market, this is week 1 of the farmers market. I took this picture at probably 9:30 in the morning on week 1. I have never seen a May market look like this, let alone the first week. I was so excited. I was doing a little dance. So I took a picture. But in order to do this work, the staff needs some support on making sure that our vendors really are high quality. So that means site visits. This year alone, we have done over 20 site visits to different farms in the area, making sure that they fit into what we require for our market, making sure they're local, finding out what kind of farming practices they use, what kind of methods they have. So we've got a little look here of Amanda checking out some seedlings in a greenhouse up at Family Garden. We have Shingle Mill Blueberry Farm. We have cowboy shrimp. So again, that local word, who knew you could grow shrimp on the Palouse? But this guy is outside of Potlatch. Really, really cool setup that I will never probably see anything like ever again. And then Black Ridge Farms with their eggs and their chickens as well. So it's important for us to be able to verify that we're providing our community with the best. And some of these site visits had been skipped for a little bit with the change in leadership for the market. So this year we did our best. We trudged forward as a group to really hit up a ton where we should normally do maybe 3 a year. We did, like I said, over 20. So now we're going to get to the fun stuff by the numbers. We recently updated some of our information, and it's estimated that in 2018 alone, we had 266,205 visitors to the market. That's an average of 10,000 people on Main Street every single week. And while I think that's amazing, I'm not really great at talking about that, so I'm going to hand the floor over to Steve Peterson. Yes, just
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much for inviting me. This last 2 weeks ago, there was a rapid market assessment here in Moscow, and we estimated that 12,000 visitors came. So if that were to be sustained over the whole year, that'd be 312,000 visitors to the farmers market. It's absolutely amazing. That is up from about 84,000 in 2003, so it's a 217% cumulative increase with an average annual growth rate of 8%. So it's absolutely, absolutely phenomenal. It's nearly 7 times the population of Latah County and 10 points, about 11 times, about 7 times the population of Latah County and about 11 times the population of Moscow. The interesting thing is that as we've done these over the past, the percent of people coming in from out of the region bringing new money to the Moscow economy has been steadily increasing. The most current estimate here is that 51% of the Moscow visitors are out-of-town visitors, many of them from the Pullman, the Lewis-Clark Valley, and also many of them from out of the region. They bring new money to Moscow. We have this absolutely wonderful and vibrant downtown that makes Moscow a really great place to live. And the farmers market is an integral part of that. If you were to be in the market 10 a.m. last Saturday, you would not be able to walk a straight line down Main Street. You would be dodging people all the way through, as I was there. And you can't see that.
They'll look like good numbers, Steve.
So there's only one number on there I wanted to talk about. One is, so there's 200, as of the 2018 numbers, was 266,000 visitors to the Moscow's farmer market. The average spending inside the market was about $22. The average spending in the rest of Moscow outside of the market was about $17. That brings in about $3.7 million inside the market and about $2.9 million in the rest of Moscow, for a total of about $6.5 million of new money to this community every year. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I created a Latah County economic model and ran the economic impacts. This is an update of a study we did 4 years ago. So there, the first row there is using the vendor survey numbers. We estimate that there's about 13 jobs created in the community. These are annualized jobs, full-time annualized jobs, with about $300,000 in wages and about $700,000 in output. And then we netted out the difference between the visitor spending surveys that we've done, and that adds another 22 jobs, or $1.3 million in economic activity to the community. The amazing thing about the market is the spinoffs. It's an incubator for small firms. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why, if you go downtown Moscow, it's hard to find a vacancy anywhere. Anytime, they're there, but you'd have to look really hard to find them. Go to some of the surrounding communities and look for vacancies, and you see them every place and everywhere. So I think one of the big strengths of the market is its role as an incubator for small business in the community and for local entrepreneurs. And they estimate that they create, spun off something like 15 to 20 firms. And it's not just in Moscow, but throughout the small towns around us as well. Potlatch and Deary, So it is an absolutely essential, essential part of the job-creating mechanism in the community. So 48 jobs and about 2.6 million from these brick-and-mortar spinoffs. And then visitors in the rest of Moscow create 30 jobs and 1.8 million in output. So the total, the market's annual impact is about 113 jobs, 2.4 million in wages and salary, and about 6.5 million in economic activity. And where you have lots of economic activity, you have lots of tax revenue. So we estimate that the local contributions to property taxes is about 139,000. State taxes, this would be sales and income taxes, is about 266,000 for a total addition to the local and state coffers of 405,000 a year. So, and it goes by the axiom, anything that creates lots of economic activity ultimately pays lots of taxes. And that's important for the community as well. There we go. The last part of this is I want to present. This was a part of the report that you have. I want to talk about some of the big picture issues. This is residence injections and leakages. It's called the residence adjustment, and these are net numbers, but the correlation between the two is unmistakable. We estimate that there's an injection of income of about $150 million into Moscow, and that comes from people who live here and work outside of the county. Whitman County, Pullman, has an equal and opposite. Now, these are net numbers, so they're not equally offsetting, but you can see unmistakably the trends, right? I did an analysis on this, and I estimate that income inflow into the community creates an additional 1,000 jobs that otherwise would not be here. So in addition to those people living here, the fact that they're bringing that money into the community and spending it local creates another 1,000 jobs in the community. So when we start talking about the vibrancy of downtown and all the components that make it such a wonderful place, like the farmers market, there are substantial economic benefits above and beyond just the numbers that we show from the spending and the visitor spinoffs. The final thing I'd like to add is I'm really excited for the MZ expansion. That is an absolutely, I think, going to be a wonderful impact, wonderful facility in the city of Moscow, and it'll have a wonderful impact. I think they're talking about expanding to 500 living wage jobs, and that'll have a high economic impact on the community as well. I'm also excited at the direction of the University of Idaho with President Green. We do have a lot of challenges. One of those has been the decline in enrollment that took place from 2003 to 2018. If we had the same number of students if we had the same number of students continuously today that we had in 2003, there'd be another 2,000 jobs in Moscow. So that's how important the enrollment and the finances at the university affect the local community. And so we're very hopeful for the coming future with President Green, but I wanted to point out how important the students are. Each student that comes here in a long-term basis creates about 3/4 of a job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
So finally, I just wanted to say a giant thank you to the liaisons that we've worked with this year, Brandy, and we worked with Catherine last year and with Jim. Thank you for your input. And then additionally, the addition of having Amanda, in my 2 years on the commission, we've had a lot of changeover in staffing and the way that the market is managed. And having Amanda in place has been so amazing. It's really great to have an amazing staff person that we can rely on as a commission, as well as just personally. I think it's been really great to work with her, and I love knowing that the market is in really good hands and well taken care of, and that we are just sitting here trying to support her. So thank you to the city for making that job possible for her. And I would love to entertain any questions.
I got a couple of comments for you, Jamie. You know, you talked earlier in your presentation about you've seen people get engaged here in all kinds of different unique things. People move here, and I know a couple that moved here, and this has been 20 years ago. The guy, he was a finance guy in New York, and his wife and sister were passing through here and stopped in the farmer's market, and that's when it was on the Jackson side, that lot. And she called him up and said, this is where I want to live and raise my kids. And they did that. And he's an author, a financial author, and a real very good one. And so there's an example, and we do see examples like that all the time. The other point I want to make, and Steve talked about, if you go down to the farmer's market at 10 o'clock, you've got to weave your way around. When I go down there, it takes me about 10 minutes to buy the stuff I want to buy, the vegetables, and it takes me about 2 hours to get out of there because I talk to so many people. But it's a social event, and that's the big thing. It's a social event that draws people from all over the place and outside our area, and it just keeps growing year over year, and it's wonderful. I call it, I mean, it's a heartthrob. And by the way, this past Saturday, Kathy and I was in Newport, Oregon, and visited their farmer's market right off of 101, and it was very, very busy too, but that was off 101, which is a very busy road. But and so I just wandered all the way through it. I mean, I took my time, and they had all kinds of tents and things set up. But I tell you what, we have the right idea about having it downtown on Main Street and widening that thing out. That was the best move that we made as a city with that farmer's market. So I wanted to add those things. Comments for either Steve or Jamie from council? Anyway, it's a golden star as far as I'm concerned in this city, and I always love to get a chance to brag about it every single time I get a chance.
Me too.
Pointing that out that we're the number one in the state of Idaho, and I love that. And especially when I go down and visit my friends in Boise, it's great. So, and this is exciting stuff, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we got a new president of the university. I'm very, very optimistic about that, Steve. We got a lot of things going in our way in our favor in this town. And you talked about EMSI, and EMSI's long-term plan too is putting another building on there and having down the road 1,000 employees, living wage jobs or better. That's going to have a huge, tremendous impact on our city. So I'm excited about that and looking forward to it. Thank you so much for the great work you do, Jamie. And thank you, Steve, for the presentation. Okay. I got so wrapped up in my thoughts and talking, I forgot where we were. Let's see, number 6. We are at the public hearing to open the budget for fiscal year 2018/2019. And Gary Reedner is with us this evening. Hello, Gary.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't have a presentation tonight. As I presented to Public Works Finance Committee last week, State of Idaho provides a mechanism for cities, counties, and local governments to open their budgets or adjust their budgets that have changed from the passage of the annual appropriation ordinance. So we passed that, or council passed that ordinance in August of 2018 for the fiscal year 2019 budget. If we get additional revenues or we expend beyond the appropriations that have been approved by the city council, it's required that a second public hearing is held and that council authorize amendment of that annual appropriation ordinance. The way we do that in the city of Moscow is typically throughout the year when one of these extraordinary circumstances occur, that staff comes to council, reports on whatever is expected to happen, seeking authorization from the council either to exceed the appropriation that had been passed in the fiscal year budget or to exceed the appropriation for revenues to be accepted in the fiscal year budget. That happened several times this past year. Each of those were brought to City Council. Council approved those with the proviso that we include those in the open budget process. Typically in our schedule of events, council starts with the annual budget in July at their workshop, have a public hearing, and either pass, amend, or reject the budget. This year it took 2 public hearings. Council approved that budget. Last year it was 1 public hearing. Then after that appropriation ordinance has been passed for the upcoming fiscal year, we generally move toward closing out of the current fiscal year, and the first step in that is to amend the appropriation ordinance by opening the budget. The reason it's a public hearing is that in the same manner in which public notice is given and an appropriation ordinance is passed, you have to do the same thing in opening the budget. So we are back tonight when, upon the conclusion of my presentation, you'll have a public hearing and then direct staff what to do. You have an amended ordinance in your packet for passage. Should you decide after taking that public comment, you should want to do that. So I'll run through these. In the first, the general fund is typically our most flexible fund. It's where most revenues other than revenues from rates, utility rates are receipted. Typically, we don't run out of appropriation authority in the general fund. There's quite a bit of flexibility in there. One of those we wanted to point out, even though it's not the subject of this open budget process, is the City Council's approval of an expenditure of $19,750 to Latah County on behalf of the Latah County Historical Society in order to put a new roof on the McConnell Mansion. As you'll recall, that was something the council committed to in FY16, I believe it was, and then in FY17, 17 and 18, there was supposed to be another request made. Due to just a snafu, that was not made. Latah County depended on that council authorization to do so, brought that back to council. Council decided to honor that previous promise, so that $19,750 will be expended in this fiscal year. However, it will overrun the line item for non-prioritized legislative projects. The Recreation and Culture Fund's fairly small issue, but $2,200 were received for the aquatic wheelchair projects that some of you attended and you saw in the paper. The Moscow School District Community Playfield Fund, which is run by the city. City does the maintenance on the community playfields. Half of the cost of that maintenance is paid to the city by the Moscow School District. In this case, we were approached by the school district wanting to put a perimeter fence around the parking lot to the playfields. Brought it to council. Council approved that. We expended the funds, which amounted to $16,833, in which we also received $8,416 back from the school district for their half. Now, because we utilize fund accounting, appropriations are made or approved within those individual funds. So if the appropriation will exceed the appropriated funding, then we come back, and that's why we break these out fund by fund. So the Fleet Fund, the biggest expenditure there was for a Pierce Saber fire truck in the amount of $545,472. Because of, and I don't pretend to know all the accounting rules that GASB, GFOA put upon us, but we expended the funds in fiscal year 2018 because we did not realize the asset. We didn't receive it until fiscal year 19. That's when we booked the expense. So that caused us to have to, again, adjust the appropriation. Two other units were also purchased, a Ford F-550 for the street department and a Ford F-350 for the water department for a total of $124,500. These were funds that had been accumulated. They came from beginning fund balance because we utilize fleet management that allows us to accumulate funding, and then if the vehicle, for some reason, if it has more useful life, but it is set, it is intended to be gotten rid of, but if we're still getting use out of it, fleet determines whether or not it's still a good expenditure of funds. If that happens, we will continue to use that unit as long as we have accumulated funding to buy a new one when it fails. So that's how that happened. Information Systems Fund, we received a $12,000 grant for e-ticketing. So that will be received in the Information Systems Fund. Capital Projects by far is the largest adjustment. We had on the Atani Park Concrete Slab and Pathway Project. This was a project that was funded for almost $55,000 in FY18. Because it was getting toward the end of the construction season, the contractor recommended that we hold off until the next construction season to build that. That, of course, flopped us into the FY19 construction season and FY19 budget year. So we carried those funds over, even though they should have been expended in 18 because the project was delayed, they were expended in 19. Again, taken from beginning fund balance because the unexpended funds from fiscal 18 were put in beginning fund balance for fiscal 19. Added about $35 or $3,000 also to help out with playground equipment for the park. Council also received grant funding, a little over $46,000 for bike shelters and some other grant fundings from the MTI Grow America grant. So that, again, the environmental review was delayed, so we were unable to construct those in FY18. So they, following the same concept as the Atani Park project, were expended in 2019. Lastly, and the big one is that on May 19th, our citizens passed a $9,640,000 general obligation bond for construction of the police station, renovation of the 4th Street facility currently occupied by the police, and the man building. There were expenses that were expended prior to that. One of those was $810,000 for purchase of the property at the intersection of Southview and Highway 95. Council authorized purchase of that property in December. It became available. We came to a price. Council authorized expenditure. Council also passed a resolution allowing the proceeds of that bond issuance to then reimburse the general fund. In addition to that, there was about $40,000 that we expected to be expended in fiscal year 19 for design services for that project as well. I'm pleased to report that tomorrow morning at 8:30 Pacific Daylight Time, they will actually have the closing for the bond. We should receive a wire transfer of the bulk of that funding tomorrow morning. So that completes our process for that. With that, that is the open budget process. After the public hearing, council's recommendation is that council pass the ordinance under suspension of the rules, and that we essentially take the first step in closing fiscal year 2019. Any questions?
Questions for Gary before I open the public hearing from councilors? Thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much.
And we will officially open the public hearing at 7:37. So anybody that would like to come up and speak, please state your name. We'll give you 3 minutes about anything to concern with our open budget. Going once, going twice, going 3 times, we'll close the public hearing at 7:38, and I'll turn it over to council.
I think we've discussed all these items ad nauseum, and therefore I would approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and it be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Jim and a second by Gina to approve the ordinance under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings that be read by title and published by summary. I will start the roll with Catherine.
Aye.
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 Okay. So that ordinance number 2019-10. Okay, ordinance number 2019-10, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, amending ordinance number 2018-09, the appropriations ordinance for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2018 and ending September 30th, 2019, to the appropriate monies in the sum of $87,504,290, providing for this ordinance to be in full force effect from and after its passage, approval, and publication according to law. Okay. Thank you, Gary. We will move on to item number 7, stormwater permit utility study. We have Kyle here with us still, and Mia Batista will be here with us as well. Hello, Kyle.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. How do I
Well,
technically illiterate.
Jack's our guy.
Let's get back.
Oh, geez, Gary got it. Holy smokes. Just saying.
Here you beat him. Well, I'm excited to be here tonight to discuss stormwater. It's been about 7 months since we provided an update on the permit and the utility study. Just a little regulatory background. In 1972, the United States government passed the Clean Water Act, which amended the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1948. And really the goal of the Clean Water Act was to not only maintain but also restore the biological, chemical, and physical integrity of the nation's waters. If you recall, at that point in time, we had some serious issues with our surface waters. You know, the Cuyahoga was on fire and so on and so forth. A very vital component of the act is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Program, Section 402 of the act. And primarily what it does is it allows point source discharges, discrete discharges like our wastewater treatment plant, to discharge certain pollutants pursuant to a permit, which contains permit limits and conditions. For quite a while, the primary focus was just on wastewater discharges. And in 1990, Congress amended the act to include regulations to deal with stormwater. They created Section 402P, and the primary focus at that point in time was to regulate the discharges from large and medium-sized municipalities, those that were over 100,000 population or more. They also included a provision to regulate construction activities for the first time greater than 5 acres, as well as certain industrial activities. And then in 1999, they amended the act again to focus on what they call small MS4s. And those are municipalities that have a population of greater than 50,000 in what they call urbanized areas, and those are kind of classified by the U.S. Census Bureau. They also modified the regulatory threshold from 5 acres to 1 acre. That would be regulated, and it's regulated under a separate permit than what we're going to talk about tonight. And it also directed EPA and the regulations to look at smaller municipalities, those that have less than 50,000 population, for potential regulation. So a little bit about the permit process. The city of Moscow was notified by EPA that we were a candidate for regulation back in 2007. In 2008, we finally received the official designation notice, and this month, back in 2009, we made application for permit coverage. Fast forward 9 years or 10 years later, or 9 years later, we received the draft permit. We briefed council on that, I think in early December of last year. They went out for a 45-day public comment period, which closed January 10th. And just last month, we received the final permit. And it will have a effective date of October 1st of this year. So the permit requires the city to develop, implement, and enforce a comprehensive stormwater management program. And this list right here just kind of shows a lot of the control measures that we'll have to implement and enforce as part of this program over that first permit term. The permit is applicable to just the city-owned and operated portions of our municipal separate storm sewer system within our urban boundary. And in June, we found out that the U of I had been notified that they were a candidate for regulation, and so they will have to go through the same process that we did and make application by this December is our understanding. And the permit is effective for 5 years, and it contains a lot of stipulated timelines that we'll need to develop certain programs within a certain time period to comply with those provisions. As we discussed a little bit earlier this year, we have been working on a stormwater user fee study in anticipation of receiving this MS4 permit. We contracted with a company out of Yakima, Washington, Aspect Consulting, back in 2016 and finished up the first phase of that in late 2018. The council authorized the second phase of that task order in January of this year, and this is kind of where we're at right now. We're trying to finalize the program budget and financial plan. We're working on a customer billing database and trying to figure out how to link those with our other utility billing databases. And I'll go ahead and let Mia just talk a little bit about the user fee ordinance.
Hello. So as a result of the MS4 permit mandatory requirements, the city would be subject to civil and criminal penalties under federal law if we fail to comply. The stormwater user fee ordinance that we are drafting is going to address all of those requirements. The city has the authority to create a stormwater utility and impose and collect fees for the services provided by the city pursuant to the Idaho Constitution and the Idaho Code. The purpose of the stormwater user fee ordinance touched on by Kyle, but are 5 main points. One is to equitably allocate the operation, maintenance, improvement, and regulatory compliance expenses of the city's stormwater control system to users of the system, and this is important, in proportion to the level and type of services received from the system. And so the fee that they're going to be charged is proportionate to the use and the benefit. And the second purpose is to provide for the establishment of a system of stormwater user fees and provide that the fees collected are set aside and designated solely for the use for the maintenance, operations, improvements, regulatory requirements, and program costs of the city stormwater control system. A third purpose is to provide that all services mandated or authorized by this ordinance to be furnished to customers at the lowest possible cost. The fourth purpose is to establish and enforce regulations and standards and implement programs necessary and are convenient to comply with the requirements of the city's permit, the MS4 permit, as well as the rules governing collection, treatment, detention, and disposal of the stormwater over the shallow and deep aquifers that underlie Moscow. The fifth main purpose is to establish a city stormwater division to operate and maintain the city's stormwater control system and to regulate stormwater and drainage issues within the city. Lewiston, if you recall, faced many issues with their stormwater ordinance utility that they tried to implement. It was challenged, and it did not withstand judicial scrutiny. So, in short, Lewiston's ordinance was determined to be an unlawful tax rather than a regulatory fee. And we are addressing that and making sure that we do not make the same mistakes that Lewiston made. And we're doing that with the help of Aspect Consulting, with the studies that have been taking place, and with the way that we're drafting the stormwater utility fee ordinance. Coeur d'Alene has a stormwater utility fee that also addressed a lot of the issues faced by the city of Lewiston We have a lot of similarities, at least what we're proposing has a lot of similarities to Coeur d'Alene's. Theirs has been in place since, I believe, 2012, and it has not faced any legal challenges. So in sum, the user fee authorized by this ordinance that we're proposing, or will be proposing to council, is used to recover on a prorata basis the costs incurred by the city in providing stormwater drainage services, and is not intended to generate revenues in excess of those costs. The only fees that will be assessed are to properties actually receiving the stormwater service. So we're here to answer any questions.
I have
that you may
a question for you, Mia, and this may even go over to Gary. This ordinance that we're talking about, this user ordinance for those that use the stormwater, when do you see that coming forward in front of the council?
Our schedule, as we mentioned in the budget message and throughout the budget presentation, it will have to be established sometime within fiscal year '20. We anticipate that we will come to you again, probably in late October, and then present with you, as Mia and Kyle both said, one of the big issues with a stormwater utility, because it is a fee, the fees charged must be reasonably related to the services rendered. So we've asked Aspect, we've met with the former Coeur d'Alene city attorney staff that worked on their ordinance to make sure that the science of stormwater detention, if you will, or stormwater regulation is reasonably related to the fee being charged. We're just getting toward the final stages of that. Couldn't have it ready to go in the FY19 budget process. So we hope to bring that to you in pretty much completed form in late October for consideration in November. We anticipate that it'll come before council for passage, consideration and passage, likely in December or January.
Okay.
Is the schedule that we've worked out. Of course, it all depends. We're still going through all of this. If Kyle and Mia are working on their separate pieces. As they get those honed down, working with the consultants, then it'll come to my office, we'll review it, and then we'll bring it forward to city council. So that's the tentative schedule.
Okay. Ann,
Yeah, so in terms of creating a stormwater division, is that going to be composed of existing staff, or will we need to hire people for that?
The anticipation is that one of the models that Coeur d'Alene uses, which is a pretty good model, there will need to be staff added to maintain that, and that will be paid for as we put together the financial plan for the utility. Those fees will help pay for those positions. One thing Coeur d'Alene does that we are exploring at this point is that rather than have the stormwater utility purchase equipment, buy a bunch of stuff, it's specialized equipment, vac trucks, dump trucks, things like that, that they can contract with city vendors, meaning the street department typically, to assist with that. So it'd be a purchase of services, similar to what we have now when we allocate costs between the utilities and the general fund. So we don't know how many people it will take. My anticipation is, and I've not seen the final numbers, it will likely take 2 technicians managing the system, depending on, I can't make any promises because I haven't seen the final documents. I don't know what additional staff will need for the maintenance of the system.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, what kind of services are looking to be required by the permit? I mean, we've got a bunch of point sources of wastewater dumping into the creek, and some of it's going down to the water reclamation and reuse facility and things like that. What services are being contemplated?
That not go back. There we go. So these are the minimum control measures that we'll have to implement. So by, I believe, December 1st of 2020, we'll have to develop a formal public education and outreach program, which will require us to target various audiences, such as homeowners, the general contractors, things like that. there'll be a significant amount of work to rewrite a lot of city code. We'll be doing we'll be up in our efforts with construction and post-construction site runoff control. A lot more street sweeping. We'll see, as we talked about last January, our preventative maintenance program has been pretty much non-existent. Due to the lack of resources, the financial resources we've been highly reactive. So we're gonna have to replace a lot of pipe, clean a lot, rapidly assess the MS4 and those types of things. We've got a really good understanding of kind of where everything's, got a pretty good understanding, I think, of where everything's at. But there's a lot of things that we'll need to, in addition to what we've been doing.
If I may. The quality, it's a regulation of the quality and quantity of the runoff. So as Kyle mentioned, street sweeping, storm gutters, street gutters are conveyances for stormwater. We do have stormwater piping under some streets. So you typically clean the streets more so you have less pollutants in the water as they run to the stream. I seem to recall that we have well over 200 outflows to
Yeah.
Paradise Creek that the city's responsible for. If there is an outflow from a private residence or a private development that is not city infrastructure and it is polluting the creek, because we're regulated by the total maximum daily load of pollutants that Paradise Creek can carry, with that, you talk about the illicit discharge detection. If somebody is not regulating their discharge, it's impacting the health of the creek, that we in turn are being held responsible for because we have the point source, the most point source, then it behooves us to find those and get those regulated as well. So there's a bunch of things that need to go on. We've been doing most of the stormwater regulation out of the street department. There has been some assistance from the sewer department because, again, our NPDES permit for the water reclamation and reuse facility is also regulated by that total maximum daily load. So they kind of work in concert to maintain the health of Paradise Creek and also the South Fork of the Palouse.
Kyle?
Randy.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned that the education and outreach deadline you think is the end of December 2020? I think that's what you said?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, would that be
I-
the case for all of the requirements? Is that we have until the end of 2020 to comply?
I see the effective date as like the starting gun.
Yeah.
We have, for a lot of those other minimum control measures, we have actually till the 4.5 years from the effective date to comply with those provisions. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done to address those provisions, and you can't just do it in year 4. I mean, so
Right.
we'd like to get going,
Yeah.
check them off, and start improving the water quality, because that's the whole purpose of, is to improve the receiving water bodies.
And then you said that the permit is good for 5 years, so then at that 5-year point, theoretically, all the conditions have been met for at least 6 months, and you just apply for a renewal of the permit?
Yeah, and so what you would do is just continually improve the quality and quantity, or improve the quality and reduce the quantity of your discharge from the MS4.
If I may again, we have an NPDES permit issued for the the water reclamation reuse facility, and it was issued, I believe, in 1999, if I recollect. It expired in 2004, and we've not been issued a new permit. However, we remain regulated under the now expired but yet current permit. We've not achieved all of the regulations for our water reclamation reuse facility. For instance, one thing we've reported to the council on for the last dozen years is we are dealing with temperature. Just a couple of degrees in the creek during growing season is something that the city likely will have to adjust somehow. It's a very expensive proposition, but temperature was part of that original permit. We've not achieved that yet. We've not been fined for it either by EPA because we continue to show progress. EPA wants to see that, okay, you may have 5 years to implement this stuff, but if you come in year 3 and you haven't done anything, then chances are they're going to start saying, and that flexibility, that ability to work with the city starts to go away. They want to see continuing efforts. This utility
Ongoing.
is the first step in getting the funding to be able to implement those conditions.
Jim?
Since the U of I has to have a separate permit, doesn't their stormwater discharge come in upstream from where we'll be testing? So how will we reconcile that if they're gonna have to be testing upstream and then we're testing below their discharge?
They discharge to our MS4. They do have their own discrete discharges. I don't think the city would likely be going up and downstream of their discrete discharges, but the DEQ and Department of Ecology could possibly do that. I think what we're concerned with as staff is what's the quality of their discharge into our MS4? Because the discharge from our MS4 is what we're ultimately reliable for. And so, and they don't have to have a separate permit. We have been in discussions with the U of I about being a co-permittee, which is, it's always doable, actually. We could always modify an application. So, but that's, our understanding is that they're going to go their own separate way, so.
Yeah, the university is regulated. They've been given notice, as Kyle said in June, that they will be regulated just like we are, so they will be under their own permit. We do have some intersecting lines. We discharge the portions of their system, they discharge the portions of our system. So there may be times when the U of I is a client of the cities, just as they are a client in our wastewater. So they pay a fee for sewage disposal. They will end up paying a fee for stormwater as well. How that works out, as Kyle indicated, there were opportunities. We've had meetings with EPA. We've had meetings with University of Idaho leadership to determine whether or not there was some joint way to approach this. At this point, the University of Idaho is determining that they want to move ahead on their own. We will complement them any way they can, and we expect that they will complement us in any way they can. But the bottom line is, if we are doing everything we can to regulate our discharge and we're within our permit, and there is something else, either from another MS4, the University of Idaho, or private discharges, that we need to find out where it's coming from and make sure that we take care of that so that the health of the creek is maintained.
Catherine?
My question has to go along with the water reclamation and reuse facility temperature. So from what I understood, that temperature hadn't been defined completely, and that's why the permit was allowed to be continued. And so what I was wondering is, with the stormwater permit, is the parts of what they're going to consider contaminated, has that been completely clarified, or is that too kind of moving?
What our effective permit will require us to conduct outfall monitoring. And I think what the EPA will try to do is determine whether or not the quality of our receiving or the quality of our discharges is causing or likely to cause violations of Idaho water quality standards. Mm-hmm. We don't have any permit limits for things like E. coli or nutrients, metals like that yet. That's a potential down the road, but that's why things like street sweeping and picking up the leaf litter, lawn clippings, and, trying to reduce the amount of fertilizer as much as possible is going to be vital. So.
Another question. Yeah, do you, when thinking about the fees moving forward over time, would you anticipate that the city's costs will decrease after some of the initial conditions are met in infrastructure, or is it likely to stay stable or to increase over time?
Well, as the study is put together, we will have a plan put together for full implementation. Depending on how that works, it also includes an assessment of the system. We have areas of the city that don't have curb gutter, so there may be plans put in place to have those installed at some point. There are places in the city that don't have stormwater conveyance of any sort, pipes or curb and gutter. So if it's determined that the best way to deal with that is to get those installed, or how we upgrade the system, it's very similar to the comprehensive planning that's done in the water utility and the sewer utility. And that is that, okay, we've got this, we need to have this, how do we get there? So it's tough to say. My anticipation, like any other service, is you can't expect it's going to go down. There is some infrastructure involved in stormwater conveyance. So chances are assessment will take place on the front end, the education, then it'll be setting up the utility, the mechanism for approaching some of these capital projects, as well as the operations. So it's impossible. You're asking us questions that we just aren't equipped to answer right now.
Well, some of those things too, folks, are going to be future things. So let's keep this in perspective. This is a 5-year permit, so it's going to be ongoing. Kyle's going to be back and telling us about this
Ad nauseam.
year over year over year. Yeah, adding on to it, because we have no crystal ball about what the future, what the EPA requirements, what they'll making us do. But the catch is, and the important thing for us, is to be on a program, have some kind of consistency in that program, and build on that program on an ongoing basis. And so, and that's how I see it.
And it seems great that you've got Coeur d'Alene and you're already, finding how they're doing things and how it's working, and how to successfully implement to meet the mandatory requirements. So it's really nice to have that model, I suppose, in your life.
Yeah, and it might be one of those no duh moments, but this predominantly is city and businesses within the city. Is that right? Am I getting that?
Well, like Gary said, I mean, it's going to be, so I guess the utility user fee would be assessed to properties within the city limits, which would, if passed, would include residences, would include a multifamily, include commercial businesses.
Yeah, there are a bunch of factors that go into determining the fee itself, including how much load you're putting on the system. Again, we have a base rate for sewer, and that covers everything. We have different classes for residences versus businesses, types of businesses. It's all related to the load on the system that business or those residences are creating. Water, on the other hand, you have a base rate, and then you have a volume rate as well. So you pay the base rate, then depending on your usage, if you want a green lawn, you're going to pay more because you're going to use more water in our tiered system. One of the considerations in this is how much impervious surface you have in your property. So if you have a parking lot, a huge parking lot, chances are you're going to be shedding water. Now, do you retain some of that water on the system so that it's metered out slowly? Do you have some on-site things such as bioswales to treat that stormwater? There are all those things taken into account. Coeur d'Alene, for instance, they implemented their stormwater fee, their ordinance, and every year, if you have made changes to your impervious surfaces, improvements, any of that stuff, repaved a parking lot, put in a bioswale, any of those things, they will send somebody out there to reassess it so that fee is within the parameters that the user is paying reasonably related for the services that the system is providing them. So it's not like a residential sewer system where law allows us to charge a straight flat rate essentially for residences for sewer. So this is something that the users have the right to only be charged for the impacts of their discharge on the cost of running the system. So it's quite a bit of monitoring.
Okay, well,
I have one more follow-up question to that. Thank you, Mel. So will just the amount of water usage in itself be a part of that calculation?
It's stormwater,
Yeah,
okay, so
there's no
typically
way to
it's.
separate that out, like
Yeah,
what's going
storm
on.
events, things like
Yeah.
that. But one of the factors that Kyle talked about is as people fertilize their lawns, storms come along, you have a hard rain, it's going to wash those phosphates and that sort of thing into the system, which in turns impacts the health of the creek, which, by the way, also impacts our water reclamation and reuse facility background TMDL as well. So
Yeah, they're
it's
all related.
it's this omnibus system that has all of these pieces to it.
Yeah, and Brandy, if I may add, when we come back in the next few months, we'll show you how all of those classes were determined and whether or not we're going to take a tiered approach here or there, or what the recommendation will be for those billings. But the way that, just to go back, the way that the draft ordinance is written is right now is that we will have the ability to appeal the calculation that was used to derive the calculation. And so that's going to be really important as we implement if we implement the study.
I have one more, and then I'll stop.
well, you know, we could go on forever
true.
talking about questions on this stuff, because a lot of this stuff's not gonna be answered until as we go along, continue.
Do you anticipate, you had mentioned that you didn't have limits on some of the issues like E. coli and that sort of thing. Are you anticipating or trying to in some degree so that it's not, surprise, here's 6 new things you got to worry about? Or is it, do they give you any warning? I mean, it seems like they kind of pre-warned you and then you got the permit, right? Are they going to do the same thing with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've done a pretty good job of assessing ongoing issues.
Okay.
There will be episodic events that we may detect something that may not be an issue. Monitoring record keeping is going to be a pretty important part of this program, and trying to figure out where we put our resources to get those results.
Something else too, as we're going along, something that Kyle had said earlier, or maybe it was Gary, that you've got a certain period of time year over year over year. If you wait 3 years and do nothing, then that's a problem. If you're doing things year over year where you're trying to make improvements and you're trying to fix things as we go along, that's taken in consideration too. That's a big effort, and that's the most important thing that I get out of this thing. As we go forward, what are we doing? And of course, we're gonna be getting a chance to see you every year,
Yeah.
because you're gonna be telling us something.
Yeah.
That's how I see it, so.
Yeah, one final comment, and that is that the street department's done an extraordinary job of taking care of stormwater without EPA regulation. When we received the preliminary notice that we were a community of interest under the small MS4, we started looking at it. We mapped out, Les McDonald, when he was here, we mapped out a plan, brought it back to council. It was just, there was no regulation forthcoming at that point. Now it is time, and it's been 12 years, the EPA finally got around to saying, okay, we need to move forward with this. So we feel pretty confident. We've been talking about this, advising the council for the last dozen years. So we feel fairly confident that we're able to move forward in the best defensible way possible.
And one other quick thing, I'll add on to that. In 2007, I was very well on the council, and we were all a little panicky back then. And God, that was 12 years ago. I don't think I had a gray hair in my head, but, anyway, so this is going to be an ongoing thing forever,
Yep.
So anyway, thank you, Kyle. It was a wonderful
Thank you very much.
report, and we look forward to seeing you guys, and thank you, Mia,
Right, have a
as
good night.
well. Okay, we will move on to item number 8, Harvest Park concept approval. We got David Schott here with us this evening to talk about that. Hello, David.
Hi, Mayor Lambert, members of council, if I can get set up here real quick. Mayor Lambert, members of council, thank you for having me tonight. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here for this exciting and unique project, the conceptual plan, draft conceptual plan for Harvest Park. Excuse me one moment.
Okay, Zach? Gary had good luck. Gary, what do we do here?
He knows to turn the on and off. Is the button on?
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Now. So, I need to turn things on and off.
Apologize for the interruption there. A little background here. On April 2nd, 2018, City Council approved 4.09 acres of parkland exchange through a dedication agreement with the intent of creating an edible forest park. Prior to this, the Moscow Tree Commission was really talking about this. And at that time, they were really looking at breaking out part of an existing park or along the pathway. Around that same time, a piece of property became available and was offered by a developer through a parkland exchange. The property wasn't suitable for a traditional park, but it might make a nice piece of property for an edible forest. So this idea was brought to the Parks and Recreation Commission, the Moscow Tree Commission, and the Moscow Pathways Commission, and they all supported the idea. So with that, we developed 3 goals. The first goal was to develop an official name for the park. This was completed on March 18, 2019, after a recommendation from the Parks and Rec Commission and the Tree Commission. Based on the 35 nominations we received, the official name is now Harvest Park. The second goal was to develop a conceptual plan for the park, which we're working on tonight. And then the third goal is to develop a management plan for the park. This is in progress. The core development team's been meeting to discuss how we're going to manage this, and I'll get to the core development team here in my next slide. So the Moscow Tree Commission has graciously accepted the role of the lead commission for this project. However, there's a lot, this is a new and exciting project, so there's a lot to it. So the idea was to create a working group through the Moscow Tree Commission, which I've been calling the Core Development Team. The members of the Core Development Team really have the knowledge and the expertise in this type of project, an edible type food forest. So with that, I'd like to introduce a couple of our members here. Mark Heinlein, which is in our audience tonight, he's with our Parks and Recreation Commission. David Griffith is with the University of Idaho and brings just a plethora of knowledge to the project. Deborah Berman, which is a board member of Rural Roots. We've got Dan Cronin, also with the University of Idaho. He's a Tree Commission member also, and Clark Phillip, a Tree Commission member. Their knowledge and expertise on this has been very valuable thus far in the project. So just a little bit of introductory about the park. Harvest Park sits off Southview Avenue, north of the Grove Apartments on Highway 95 on the south part of town. It was historically a wheat field. Excuse me. And I'd also like to read the vision statement because I think this is pretty special. So the core development team really generated this, and then the Moscow Tree Commission considered and approved it on October of 2018. Harvest Park is a long-term dynamic landscape. This unique space is intended to provide educational opportunities and example to our community of the stewardship of a public food forest. This unique space will create a sense of place and community pride for the city of Moscow for generations to come. My hope is my kids are really going to enjoy the fruits of this park. So early on, what is an edible forest? Some ideas were out there, something that would be low maintenance. We're going to have irrigation. We'll have water to the park, benches. We want it to be accessible, really an opportunity for schools and education, information, interpretive signs throughout. Really a community gathering place. Pesticide-free as possible. Some things I kind of like about this on this list would be locally grown food. All about educational opportunities. And then really this is parks going to be possible through community involvement. So now that we've got this idea of an edible forest park, it's time to turn to a conceptual plan. So now that we've got the idea, we developed hired Bernardo Wills Architects. Council approved a professional services agreement with them to guide public engagement and develop a conceptual plan. The conceptual plan is a high-level overall plan for the park that is going to be flexible over time. So now that we have Bernardo Wills Architects on board, we scheduled our first public workshop on December 19th of 2018. We had over 30 people attend the public workshop. During the first public workshop, Bernardo Wills educated the public about the site to prepare the participants for their input. They described comparables. This is a comparable out of the Seattle area, the Beacon Food Forest. They evaluated existing conditions. For example, they looked at prevailing summer and winter winds, summer and winter solar paths, and slopes. They looked at opportunities and constraints. An opportunity here might be the viewpoints. Very beautiful view sheds to the south from this piece of property. The flatter areas. Constraints, there's some steeper slopes, the water booster station. They also described the differences between a community garden and an edible forest. They discussed the principles of an edible forest, for example, stratified planting components, where you've got the canopy, the subcanopy, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, and ground covers. They discussed program elements and amenities. Finally, they categorized the park by type. Level 1 was kind of basic. There's 3 stories, your canopy, your mid-story, and your ground cover. Level 2, which is more polycultures. And then they were looking at level 3, which is your advanced succession principles. So after educating the participants in the public workshop, we broke into 6 groups, and everybody had the opportunity to design their own park. These are really fun. They get a blank map, and they start going and putting their ideas on paper. So it was a nice workshop. So based on the public input from the public workshop number 1, along with an online survey that we had 122 people participate in, 2 options were developed for input by the Moscow Tree Commission. Option A, back to the levels, was more the level 1 to 2, the basic 3 level to the polycultures. They called this the cultivated strategy. And option B, which is more that level 2 and 3, the polycultures with the advanced succession principles. And they called this the natural strategy. The Moscow Tree Commission recommended option B because it captured more of the vision. They really liked the idea of having all the human elements down at the entry of the park off Southview Avenue. Overall, they liked option B along with agroforestry and permaculture principles. That led us into the public workshop number 2 on January 16th. They recapped the project and described the elements of the draft conceptual plan. These included level 2 to 3 agroforestry, polyculture approach, restrooms, staging area, accessible path, bins, mixed edibles with support species. One of the key features of the conceptual plan is an amphitheater and educational area. This is really based on education. Themed edible forest rooms or planting schemes by zones, viewing areas, accessible pullouts with benches, and then the water. I really like this phrase, so I just kind of latched onto it. They like the concept of slow it down, spread it out, store it, and sink it. So that was the conceptual plan through the public workshop number 2. We do have a concurrent project going on the site, the water booster station. At the time of the conceptual plan, Bernardo Wills was really trying to incorporate the booster station into the conceptual plan. City met, the alignment was a little funny, so we decided to separate the 2 projects. So the water booster station will likely go about here on the site. What that did to our conceptual plan is it doesn't change any of the content, but some of this stuff in this lower area may be shifted around location-wise. So, but it'll all still be towards that entry. Long-term development. Harvest Park will be developed incrementally as funding allows over many years. This is something where we plant the seed now and generations will benefit in the future. It's important to establish a cover crop to prepare the soil and reduce weeds until the area is ready to go. We're anticipating heavy community involvement, donations of plant material, maintenance of the park. An example might be a group may adopt an area and provide the fundraising for the plant material. They'll plant the area, and then maintain the area. We're really looking for that community investment in this park. So these areas will be recognized in some fashion through a plaque or a stone to describe their contributions. There's also likely an opportunity for grants. Long-term development of Harpers Park must be flexible and rely on the experience and expertise within our community. And I think we've got that with our core development team to get us started. So, for conceptual planning, we're looking at phasing. As I noted earlier, we will have water on the site. These black icons represent water valves. There's water lines going through there, so we should be able to plug into there fairly easily. So we broke this down into 3 phases with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 for the conceptual planning process. In phase 1, we're looking at our initial developments about $197,000. This is rough order magnitude cost estimates for infrastructure. Phase 2 for pathways primarily is the $58,170, and phase 3 we're looking at just under $56,000 for a total of about $311 rough order magnitude cost estimates for infrastructure to get this going. So like I said, with phasing and conceptual we did 3 phases, but it's extremely likely that phase 1 will be broken down into phase 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. These are phases that we can go through the budget and we'll build as we can. So it'll take a long time, but it's an exciting project, and it should be a pretty great one. So the timeline tonight, we're considering the conceptual plan. Good planning is really, we want to get that water booster station put in the next couple years, and then we'll start initial development of the park as funding allows. So the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Tree Commission both unanimously voted to recommend the conceptual plan for Harvest Park in a special meeting held in July. The City of Moscow Administrative Committee considered and recommended approval last Monday on August 26th, and our recommendation is to approve the conceptual plan for Harvest Park.
It was on admin.
Yes.
Comment on it, Brandon?
With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or take comments.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, we did hear this at Administrative Committee. It is very exciting, and I love that you made the decision, all those involved, to have the public workshops and that they were well attended, and that's always great to see with a project like this that's going to hopefully impact and include a lot of the community. So I think it looks great. I think it's the fact that Parks and Tree Commission all unanimously selected the same design says a lot for Plan B, so, yeah.
Arthur.
Just a nitpicky horticultural question, but you show that the water booster station would go in somewhere in the next 2 or 3 years, but in the meantime, would the site still be under conventional cultivation, or would the cover crop go in starting sooner?
Great question, Councilor Bedke. Yeah, I'd like to get a cover crop on there when we can get some money to do so. We're in a transition. We went from a wheat field to going to develop the park. There's a transition period in there, and so I'd like to get that on sooner rather than later.
Any identification of what the cover crop would be? Just curious.
Very glad you asked that. I've got a bunch of experts called the core development team that are working on that question right now. They're getting a pretty good list together of good cover crops. Cover crops are really good just to keep preparing the soil, heal the soil, and reduce weeds. You want something growing there. So,
Thanks.
This conceptual plan, I think, as we go through our years, and thank God the Tree Commission and Parks and Rec worked together on this and came up with this good concept and this idea. I think that this is something 10, 15, 20 years down the road is going to be a real sparkling gem in this town where people are going to say, oh my God, you know, this is one of the neatest things ever. And yep, it's an ongoing process. And I actually like ongoing processes like this because you can't do it all at once. And you do it over time, period over period, and you've got a lot of different people involved in it. When you have that, then you've got buy-in from the citizens, and it's a big deal for our community. So this is a wonderful thing, and I just got to share something. And this comes from Dwight Curtis, because he picked a bunch of choke cherries at the Herc and decided to make some syrup out of it. And I understand it's really terrific. Now, I haven't tried it yet, but I plan on trying it. But the thing of it is edible forests and edible parks like this are going to be a big thing in a lot of communities, and I think that's just, I just think it's a wonderful thing for us to see forward, so.
Can I make the motion?
Yeah, of
Okay,
course, if
good.
you want, sure, somebody's got to make one.
I would happily move that we approve the conceptual plan for Harvest Park.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Gina and a second by Art to approve the conceptual plan for the Harvest Park. I'll start the roll, Than.
Aye.
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 Okay, you've got a conceptual plan, David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a good thing, 'cause it's all
Okay.
dug up already.
Yep, with that, we're gonna move on to item number 9, L2 property tax certification. Gary Reedner is back with us, and he knows how to work the system over there. We saw that earlier, so.
As improbable as it
Just shut it
seems,
off so it's
I can
easy.
shut it off. And again, I have no PowerPoint. This is some really good news that we wanted to bring back to council. As the council recalls, on August 19th, council passed the appropriation ordinance as well as authorized the mayor to sign the L2, which is a document we file with Latah County, which allows Latah County to levy the taxes authorized by the city council. At that time, we'd anticipated about $1.1 million would be necessary for the annual debt service for the $9,640,000 GO bond that I mentioned previously tonight. When we originally were estimating the project in February, we anticipated, based on our conversation with our financial consultant, that the interest rate would be about 2.1%. Since that time, and it would have taken about $85 per $100,000 of assessed valuation in order to gain enough revenues to pay that bond off over the 10-year period that was authorized. As we got closer, after the bond was passed, we were preparing documents. When we were putting the budget together in midsummer, we anticipated that interest rate would be somewhat lower, dropping the per 100,000 levy necessary to somewhere around $80 per $100,000 of assessed valuation. Fortunately, as I reported at our last council meeting, we ended up with a 1.27% interest rate, which allowed us to drop that per 100,000 levy to approximately $73 per 100,000. So the L2 that was approved by City Council on August 19th, we could have levied that amount of money and then adjusted it next year, but because we had some time before this has to get to Latah County, I believe by this Friday, if memory serves. So bringing it to council today allows us to make the amendment if council approves it, and we will only, council then will only levy the amount of, or the county will only level or levy on the amount authorized by council in order to pay that debt service off over the 10-year period. So rather than the $1.1 million, we are at $994,288, which is a savings of over $100,000 to the taxpayers
Per year, right?
per year.
Yeah, so it's like $1 million over the 10 years.
Yeah, that is a fixed interest rate. It doesn't change. So yes, that would be, we would be saving a like amount every year.
Sweet. Questions for Gary? Well, if there aren't any questions, I would move approval of the L2 tax certification in the aggregate amount of $7,164,617.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Art and a second by Jeannie to approve the L2 tax certification in an aggregate amount of $7,164,617. I'll start the roll with Catherine.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of our regular agenda, so we will go into reports. Now I'll start with you, Brandy. You got anything for us this evening?
Yeah, a little bit. Planning and zoning, had a public hearing for the amendment regarding the accessory dwelling units to eliminate the minimum lot size requirement. There was no public comment, and it passed unanimously to eliminate that. all the commissions. I'm sure everyone will have, busily working on their citizen survey questions. More review of some changes to the mobile home and RV park ordinances. Several things that Michael Ray and the commission have been working on cleaning up there, making some adjustments. It still has to go through some legal review before that will be finalized. Farmers Market, we just met tonight, and I think after that great presentation that we had from Jamie, don't have much to add. They are drafting a business letter. She referenced connecting with Main Street businesses to get input. So that's just some outreach to solicit some input, invite them to attend farmers market meetings or submit some comments to the commission themselves. And that they need an at-large member, which she also commented on. So that is all I have.
Okay, Jim.
Awesome. Okay, so you heard from the Special Tree Commission tonight. Isn't that exciting? I'm just so proud of them. We met actually this evening right before the council meeting and talked over all kinds of derivations of 3 potential questions on the citizen survey. I don't know how many times we reworded those monsters. Good Lord. And then we also talked about classes for the Parks and Rec for fall and winter. And then again, we'll do some that carry over into the spring as well. So they're busy and if you bring up Harvest Park, it kind of derails the meeting. So we try to leave that till last. Last week I went to the Parks and Rec Commission meeting and similarly to the Tree Commission, we are working on questions for the citizen survey. We talked about the pesticide-free or pesticide as low as possible park and the progress being made there. Kalisa is leaving us. And so she is gone as of the 13th of this month, and everybody, we had a moment of silence. We were that bothered by it. So we will hire after her, but, it won't be any fun. So we talked about the pool being closed as of yesterday. Does that sound right? They're howling at the Hamilton is this weekend, so be sure and bring your little 4-legged friends. And that's all I have to tell you.
Okay, Catherine.
No report.
Okay, Jim.
I have nothing to report, sir.
Martha.
Subcommittee of the Arts Commission met, which is composed of staff, city council liaison, various artists around town, looking at reviewing 12 responses to the request for proposals for the artwork at Sea and Main. And so that's going to be narrowed down on the 20th of this month to the remaining 3. And with those 3, they'll come to town, make a presentation, and then that committee will select the artist going forward with the project, should they be able to agree and not decide to punt it and start fresh if nobody likes what they've got going. So progress is being made there.
Good. Ann.
Nothing for me.
Okay, well, I got a couple of fun things I'm going to talk about. August 20th, we read out at PCE and I, Brandy and I did the kids, and it's one of my favorite things to do, little bitty kids. And I always love getting a chance to read to kids, whether it's in school or whether it's in a nature setting like PCE. Brandy and I had a good time sharing books and going back and forth. And talking to, what did we read? 4 books, those kids? Yeah.
Yep.
And so we had quite Brandy's were longer than mine, though. I had the light duties. I was just helping her turn pages. So, but anyway, that's always a fun thing.
Can I just make a little
Yes.
lighthearted comment? My brother happens to be visiting from Washington DC, and he's here. And I just have to mention that one of the books that I read was The Blueberry Pie Elf. Okay.
Well, now, would that be, and so your
Childhood
brother,
story. I
so-
had to tell them how it was written in 1954.
Okay, so your brother's name is?
Peter.
Peter, okay, well, welcome, Peter. I saw you going in and out a few times. I thought this is a distinguished looking guy. And I was your... Sweet. And then on you're welcome, August 23rd, a Smithsonian exhibit, which was a wonderful presentation at Jenny Ford Executive Chamber, as well as Dulcie from Latah County Historical Society. And I got a chance to say a few words, but those 2 ladies did a wonderful job in bringing this thing to us. In rural America, the Smithsonian, whenever we get a chance to host something like that, and we're the first city in the state of Idaho, which always makes me feel good, And of course, we are the flagship university of the state, so I got a chance to brag to this. Again, another bragging point I could point out to my Boise friends, and I will, of course. But if you haven't seen that, it's an exciting set. If you go down in the chamber, it looks like it's belonged there all along. It's wonderful. And I love those types of things. It brings rural America and the things to our town, which are cool. August 24th, we had Sync at the university, see what you can do for your new community with incoming freshmen. And of course, we gave out T-shirts, hundreds of them, and every single one of those kids go by and say, now, have you learned a fight song yet? Da-da-da, da-da-da, and of course they hadn't. And so I said, now look, you got to learn, if first kid that has this gets 2 T-shirts. So I only had to give 1. So, but I said, that's your first studies, is learn the fight song, University of Idaho, because you are officially a vandal, and you got to learn that. So that was fun. And by the way, talking about the vandals, we've got a vandal block party September 5th. I need all counselors down there. Everybody needs to join in. We're blocking off Main Street from 3rd to 6th. A lot of fun activities. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Gary, but we need people coming up and having some fun with us.
Yes, sir. You hit the Vandaltown Block Party, 5 o'clock on Thursday.
Yep.
So that'll be a great time. We have a monthly luncheon meeting, the last luncheon meeting. City, university, school district, and county on the 4th, which is tomorrow. So that'll be at 11:30 at the University in Best Western. And then tomorrow evening, after you've had a chance to lunch at the University in Best Western, at 4 o'clock, we will be having our annual Employee Appreciation Picnic. So the Hamilton Low Aquatic Center will open for one more special time to entertain the children of the city employees. So again, that starts at 4 o'clock. The barbecue, love to see you all there. Jim Bolin indicated he will be crooning to us again this year. So that's always a highlight.
Yeah.
But we love to see everybody out there and certainly want to invite all the council to attend.
Thank you. And with that, folks, I'd entertain a motion from somebody to adjourn. Let's go. Everybody in favor? Aye. We're out here at 8:42, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all.